These days, everyone seems to be buzzing about the cultural force of Black communities in the Americas, the UK, and even France. But there's one diaspora community that almost never makes the headlines. Black people living in the Nordic region, in countries like Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Iceland. Meet Golda Fania, a Sierra Leone-born, Denmark-raised changemaker. After witnessing the professional and social disconnect among Black Nordics, Golda became a master mobilizer. She co-founded the Afro-Danish Collective, launched a podcast spotlighting Afro-Danish life, and took on the role of moderator at the Nordic Africa Summit, all with one mission: to deepen the influence and impact of this often overlooked community. On this episode of Black and Borderless, Golda and I dive into the Black Nordic experience by confronting the hard questions. How do you form community in a region that isn't your birthplace? Who gets to claim Nordic identity? How does the Black Nordic experience differ from that of other diaspora communities? How are the new generation of Afro-Danes seeing themselves differently?
I think the difference for us is that we do speak the language. We are integrated. We've been educated in Denmark or Sweden or Norway. We have worked with Danes in a different capacity, in a more equals, and not like there are things that probably have been said to my mom that probably would not be said to me in the same way because of the way I am.
And of course, how can Black Nordics play a role in Africa's advancement? Find out on this episode of Black and Borderless. Hey, Golda.
Hi.
I'm so glad to have you on. I know it's been quite a job trying to get schedules reconciled and everything. And I hope you're feeling better. Are you feeling a little bit better? I know you were kind of under the weather before.
I'm still a little bit, but I think it's just me being overwhelmed. I have a lot going on. So
yeah,
when like the weekend comes, sometimes my body just kind of crashes. But then
Yep. I feel
re-energize.
Well, again, it's glad to have you on. Welcome to Black and Borderless. As you know, we met a couple of weeks ago, I believe, on via LinkedIn. And I was just really impressed by all the work that you're doing and just thought that we need to have you on to talk about all of that and your unique experiences, in the Nordic region. So again, welcome. I'm excited.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
So let's get right into it. Today, we're going to talk about the many hats that you wear as what I consider you to be, which is a passionate advocate for Black diasporans in the Nordic region. You're the moderator of the inaugural Nordic Africa Summit. You initiated a mapping project focused on diaspora-led ventures in the Nordics. And you founded you're a founding member, of the Afro-Danish Collective. And you also have your own podcast that also kind of highlights and talks about the Afro-Danish experience. So you have lots going on, but I think there's this common theme, I think, that runs across all of your work, and we'll talk a lot about that today. So I'm excited to get into it. So starting off, before we get into the work that you're doing, tell us a little bit about you. Where did you grow up? Where do you currently live?
Okay. So my name is Golda Fania. I am actually born in Sierra Leone. I migrated to Denmark at the age of 3 during the Sierra Leone Civil War. I grew up between Copenhagen and Prince George's County, Maryland, where I studied for 9 years. So I have a bit of this like Nordic minimalism, West African warmth, and then American dream that kind of shaped my worldview. I've lived in 5 different countries, 3 different continents. So I am the definition of a third culture kid. And currently I am based in London, United Kingdom. I have a background in global health, innovation, and international partnerships. But at my core, I would say I'm just someone who loves to build bridges between worlds. Most people would describe me as like a super connector. So whether it's between people, policy, North, South, diaspora, or back home in Africa, I'm always like drawn to that intersection in everything that I do.
For sure. So let's talk about, so you spent most of your time in Denmark though, right? If you kind of count all your years, being in PG County in Maryland and all those other places, you'd say you spent most of your childhood and most of your time there?
Yeah. So because
Oh,
I moved back to Denmark and then I've spent most of my time there now.
awesome, awesome. So tell us a little bit about the Nordic region. So I know everyone's familiar about where it is, that, it's this kind of region within Europe, but which countries are included and what's kind of the racial and ethnic makeup of that region?
I can mostly speak on Denmark, but the countries that are included in the Nordic regions is Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Iceland, and Finland. In Denmark, I would say it's about 12% of immigrants, many from Middle Eastern, Asia, and I would say for the Black population, it is maybe 5 to 10%, if anything. And the largest majority of Black people in Denmark, and I think also in Sweden and Norway, is Somali.
How would you describe the Black cultural experience in the Nordics? And if you don't want to talk about the region at large, you can just talk about maybe just the experience in Denmark specifically. Like, what
Yeah.
makes it distinct, in your opinion, from Black communities elsewhere in Europe or even like in the Americas?
Having lived in the UK now and having lived in the US for many years, the the thing is that we're not that many in Denmark. So as I said, it's like a very small percentage. And so the way we navigate it is that you're usually the only Black person in a certain space. Most people came Black people came either as like immigrants or as refugees. So there was a time where Denmark were taking a lot of refugees. So even just the social dynamic, the social economic dynamic of how you relate to your white Nordic peers is very different. And I would say things like representation, access, and a sense of belonging is still hard. Like we don't have that Danish melting pot concept as you see in the States, or maybe like the salad as you see in Canada. For Denmark is very much strongly a Danish national identity, and even I would say the Nordic people that are ethnic to that region are still trying to wrap their head around the fact that some of us are second generation or third generation, you know. So when they see someone like me and I say I am Danish, they would usually always follow up with no, but where are you really from? And you know, all these questions, because we're still not in that place where we would say someone like me is Danish, even though I am. So that's the reality. And because there's a strong social welfare, it's very easy for people of color and Black people to mobilize through society. But as I said, you often find yourself as being the only one in the room. So you're either, you know, very hyper visible or you're invisible, and you're navigating between those two extremes.
No, that's really interesting. And you're not the first person who's told me this, right? Just about kind of the experience of immigrants in Europe versus maybe in the Americas and that kind of feeling of otherness that exists in Europe. It does exist in America too. We can't, gloss over that or sugarcoat it in any way, but I think it manifests in a different way. But in the States, I can confidently walk around and say I'm American and not have the follow-up question. Sometimes it comes, but when it comes, it feels unusual.
Yeah.
But it's interesting how in Europe, or specifically in this case in Denmark, being asked, no, where are you really from, just is like the norm, and you being Danish doesn't exist. And I think another thing too that's interesting is that there's a Black American identity, right? That's pretty
Yeah.
strong, and that's considered a pretty strong subset of the American identity. Um,
Yeah.
Whereas it seems like, in my opinion, I could be wrong, in Europe or in the Nordics specifically, um, the Black, let's say Danish, identity is like an immigrant identity and not necessarily like I'm a part of this place identity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, this is something we have spoken about for years. Another thing is that even though Denmark were also part of the transatlantic slave trade, they had colonies very far removed from Denmark. So whereas in the Americas, they came to America and kind of, you know, had children and their children and their children. There's like a history within the land itself. In Denmark, it was the Virgin Islands that had most of the Danish slaves, and they were there for 300 years. So they never really, it was very few that touched foot in Denmark. So the average Danish person, although they earned a lot of money and wealth do that, the average Danish person never had to see eye to eye with the fact that they were slave owners, and that Black people had to learn Danish because of the slave owners. So it's just way too removed to have created that type of identity, and it's a very homogeneous culture. So if one thing that people always say when they come, they're like, why are you guys so gray? Or why are you always wearing white or black? Or like, it's very dull. We don't wear bright colors, and everybody kind of just wants to look the same and blend in. And that's very part of the Scandinavian identity as well. It's just bland.
Yeah. And you feel like Black Danes or Black Scandinavians really assimilate and adapt that kind of aesthetic of the, like what we call in the States, the IKEA aesthetic, right? Like,
yeah. If you see somebody that is Black with like bright colors or like their cultural African attire, it's usually someone who's studying, like a student. Then it would be someone who's born and raised there. Only because you get socialized very quickly to not stand out. You feel a bit awkward almost, like, why are you drawing so much attention to yourself?
wow, that's really interesting. That's a really interesting, like, I think, unique experience that feels unique to that region, and specifically to Denmark. That I think, yes, that problem doesn't exist in the U.S.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the work that you're doing. So we've talked about kind of your lived experience as a Black Dane, or the experience of Black Danes and other Blacks in the Nordic region. You're a founding member of the Afro-Danish Collective, right? Tell us a little bit about that organization, and why you decided to help initiate it or co-initiate it.
So it started after the big demonstration around, this was 2020, right before lockdown. And then, the George Floyd, and how it like was a wave across the entire globe. And I think it was one of the first times where I think a lot of people of color and Black people in Denmark said, it's time for us to really vocalize this experience that we're having. We don't have the language in Danish to speak about racial discrimination. A lot of our language that we use is borrowed from America. So after the demonstrations, it gave us now the language and the opportunity to now form an organization that would now fight racism in Denmark or speak up about it. From a European perspective, Denmark has actually been sued a few times because of racial discrimination towards Black people, and because of the lack of laws and policies against that. But again, when the population that it's targeting is so small, things like gaslighting and not necessarily taking it as like a big issue comes up. So forming this organization was really for us to say, hey, no, on an institutional, structural level, we would like to make sure that people of color, Black people that look like us, and young children, the next generation, don't have to go through some of the things that we have to go through, like finding it harder to get a job, or having your teacher tell you that you're not gonna make it to university because your Danish isn't good enough. Rather than checking if you're dyslexic, they assume that it's because you're Black. So those are the things we were fighting. We were going into schools. I did a few presentations within high schools. We did a few personal demonstrations as well. And we had workshops where we were basically teaching the language of discrimination and the power that language have in othering people groups, especially people who don't look like you.
Yeah, you raised an interesting point that this was kind of inspired by the movement that originated in the U.S. with the murder of George Floyd in 2020. I always like to ask people outside the U.S., blacks outside the U.S., this that there were other movements and other incidents that happened in the U.S. prior to that, right? Um, that sparked outrage here in the U.S. What was it about 2020? Do you think that really sparked this kind of like fire across the world, specifically in the Nordic region and in Denmark? What do you think felt different about it, and why did you guys feel like no, at this point we need to also establish a movement here and also find our own voice to speak out against discrimination? What was special about that particular time, if anything?
So I would say we also did march when Trayvon Martin was killed. But I think 2020, what happened was that communities had already started waking up. There was this, what quote unquote, woke movement, so people were already saying, okay, we're tired. So that was kind of like the final straw. And I think us seeing how the rest of the world responded also really gave people the boldness to now speak up. There were people that I have known for years who had probably never been to a demonstration, never been activists, probably are like, oh, why do you always have to bring up racial issues? That came out and said, finally, now everybody's watching. I can also speak out. So I think it was a combination of the fact that people's eyes and ears were opening slowly, but also I don't want to speak wrongly, but around that time we were in lockdown, so they were kind of forced to listen.
Yeah. Yeah, I think even the same here. I think people were on lockdown, so they were already frustrated about that. Then you kind of add this extra element to it, and people just kind of were like, "This is enough." So yeah, I do think being on lockdown was a blessing and a curse in that way, because I think it got people to really have time to reflect on what was happening and really take it in a way that they couldn't before for other similar incidents like Trayvon Martin and other things like that. So I think that's a really good point. So do you think, because it's been said that in the States, that movement that was sparked in 2020 by the George Floyd incident, that the momentum has kind of died, or we've lost momentum and it's kind of lowered. There was this kind of moment of like heightened awareness for people of color, and that's still there, but it seems like the people who were advocating for people of color have kind of since kind of lost interest. Companies have withdrawn dollars for DE&I, for diversity and inclusion and things like that. Do you see the same thing happening in Denmark and other Nordic countries, or do you feel like the momentum is still there that was kind of sparked in 2020?
I would say so, but disappointingly, now people kind of have become desensitized to it. So I hear comments like when they see a Black person on commercials, and that is because of all the DEI work that's been done, they're like, oh, this is just a Black Lives Matter initiative. This is just a Black. And personally, that's something that gets me really annoyed. Only because we fought for representation. So the way that wokeness now is now becoming this word of insult, or diversity is now becoming this sense of like, oh, it's just tokenism. I think that's why people are withdrawing, because they're feeling at least like, oh, now with all this noise that was made, maybe I'm only here because of Black Lives Matter, and they just want to check a box, you know.
Yeah.
At least that's what I'm hearing. I don't believe so. I believe that people are there because they earned it, and it is necessary to bring people in. But of course, with every pushback, there will always be a counter reaction.
Yeah, yeah. And again, I think that mirrors the experience, I think, of lots of Black professionals in the States. Like this kind of feeling of like feeling like, you're a token, or this kind of imposter syndrome that you feel because you are a diversity and inclusion, or you think you're a diversity and inclusion hire. Am I here by merit, or because they're trying to check a box? I think that still exists. And I kind of now wonder, like, we're having this discussion, right? I, as, a Black person with, an immigrant parent here in the US, you as a Black person who grew up in, Denmark with immigrant parents as well. I wonder if there are a lot of these like cross global conversations happening about these experiences like we're having now. Like now that I think about it, I can't really think of like any forums. Maybe they're out there, and forgive me if there's someone out there who started kind of forum of these kind of shared experiences between Blacks from different parts of the diaspora, Europe versus the States. I'm starting to think that we need to have more of these because I think there's so many shared stories that could we could exchange, that we could help empower each other or help build each other, and it's just not really happening, at least not that I've seen. Maybe you have, but I have not.
I haven't seen that many, to be honest, but we do have Black Americans in Denmark. There's a group, and I love to meet them because then conversations like this do happen, and I love to hear like their culture shock or what they think, what they like about Denmark and what they don't. So it's usually in those types of forums that I get to have such conversations. But you're right. I would personally love to hear more about, the Black British experience and understand how that is as an African being raised in the UK, which is very different from me that was raised in Denmark.
Yeah, I think there's a whole series there waiting to happen.
Yeah,
And I
exactly.
would like to be born. We may just be on to something right now. And that's how collaboration was born. No. But on a serious note, so let's talk about now. We've talked about kind of the shared experiences between, let's say Blacks in Denmark and those in the US. I want to talk about the connection that you feel like Afro Danes have maybe with the actual people on the continent of Africa, right? There's been, and I'll start by just kind of explaining to you what I'm observing and witnessing and even experiencing here in the U.S. is those of us who are born to African immigrant parents here have started really re-embracing our roots to a certain extent through entertainment, though. So I would say like through Afro beats and kind of the explosion of that and other forms of entertainment, we're kind of reconnecting with our parents' countries or our home countries in Africa through that. And there's this kind of pride again in having ties to the continent, although you were born here. But it's like, I have ties to the continent. My parents are from there. I listen to WizKid. There's this kind of explosion. Do you feel that same kind of pride, especially in like first and second generation Black Danes? Do you feel like that's happening?
I do. I do. And for the same reason, through the music, like I went to a young Ugandan kid's birthday party. He was turning 18 and
Mm-hmm.
they were playing Afro beats. And I was just like, this is amazing because when I was growing up in Denmark, the only time I heard African music is if I went to a Sierra Leonean party, a Ghanaian party, a Cameroonian party. So for this individual to be playing that for his high school classmates at his graduation party, I thought that was beautiful to see. I think it's amazing. Also, we have young artists. There's a young artist called Ice Kid, who is Ghanaian Danish, and he shoots some of his videos in Ghana. And he, he has a song called "I Am African." So it's like in Danish, "Jeg er afrikaner." Basically speaking about this Ghanaian pride and being African and claiming it, something that I did not necessarily see when I was growing up. So you're right, there is more of an interest. More people are traveling to the continent, wanting to go by themselves as well, not waiting on their parents to say, we're going to Nigeria for vacation, like it's kind of like, no, let's book a trip to Tanzania, or it's an amazing movement that we're seeing through music. And I also hear Afro beats in our regular supermarkets, which shocked me. So I'm walking in the supermarket and I just hear Burna Boy, and I'm like, okay, we have come far. We have come far, guys.
Yeah,
We've
no,
really
no, no. I'm glad to hear that it's the same there because yeah, here on like mainstream radio, yes, I still listen to radio sometimes. Yes, I'm an old millennial, so sometimes I tune into radio. Yeah, you turn it on, you hear Thames, you hear Whiskey, and the first time I heard it, it kind of threw me off, and I was like, oh, okay, so this is our new reality. Like this has become mainstream, and it's become a thing of pride to have
yeah.
ties to the continent and to be able to express that in mainstream America. So I'm actually pleasantly surprised to hear that that's happening in in the Nordic region, in the Scandinavian countries as well. That's really good to hear.
And there's increased interest also from like the ecosystem perspective, which is why they're launching the Nordic Africa Startup Summit, because now there's this last year Denmark released the Denmark Africa strategy. And basically our foreign minister said that in the next 100 years, the most important decision will be who Africa partners with, because they realize that 1 in 4 people are going to be African. Africa is going to have the largest population and the youngest population, which means workforce, which means a plethora of opportunity. And they are now seeing that the rest of the world is looking towards Africa, so they also have to wake up. So both
Yeah.
EU, Denmark, Nordics, everybody is just saying, okay, Africa. But that's where I think the diaspora needs to come in. And that's what my work is about, because I think the diaspora needs to join Africa in setting the agenda and making sure that in however way any country, the US, UK, or the Nordics want to engage with Africa, they must include Africa's children, which is the
Yeah.
diaspora.
Yes. And I think that's a really, really important point. And I want to kind of rest on that for a second. I think when we talk about diaspora engagement, we normally talk about it from the vantage point of, let's say, African government engaging with you know, their citizens or former citizens in the West, right? So Sierra Leonean government engaging with, Sierra Leoneans who live in the West. But we don't often talk about diaspora engagement as Western governments ensuring that Africans who live in the diaspora have a say in how those governments engage with continent and countries on the continent. I think that's a really, really important point that we need to talk a lot more about. Like, how do we ensure that as these Western nations, and in the Nordics, or in the U.S., how do we ensure that we who live in the West, who actually have cultural ties to
Yeah.
that region, that we're part of that conversation? I don't think that's talked about enough. Like, in the U.S., I'm starting to see it kind of bubble up in certain places. But I think it takes people like you and me to a certain extent to really call it out and really ensure that we're part of that. Because if we don't, I think what will happen then is that you'll have these, Western governments going into Africa, and I don't want to say they're going to, exploit, but exploitation is, I think, a part of, foreign relations to some extent, right? Like, I need to figure out what I get out of you and what you get out of me. But if we are not a part of that conversation, I don't think that Africa will have a fair share of whatever we'll get the most out of that relationship with these Western nations. So we need to be there. We need to ensure that Africa is getting as much out of those relationships as they are giving to them, if that makes sense.
Yes,
Um,
it makes loads of sense.
and that we as diasporans are also getting something out of it, that we are not left by the wayside when it comes to investments in Africa or things like that. So we'll talk a little bit about that later and what kind of like you're doing to ensure that that's happening. Um, but I just want to now switch gears a little bit and talk about your entrepreneurial advocacy. So far, we've been talking about kind of your cultural experience and your cultural advocacy through, the Afro-Danish Collective. So let's switch now and talk about your, advocacy and the work you're doing with entrepreneurs, Black diaspora entrepreneurs, in the Nordic region. So first, you actually did like a mapping of African diaspora-led business ventures in the region. Tell me a little bit about that and how that came about.
Yeah, so out of this podcast that I've been doing, talking about the diaspora experience, I realized that we are working in silos. And as mentioned, we are not the biggest population in the Nordics. So I connected with the project lead of the Nordic Africa Startup Summit. And one of the first questions I asked him is, does the community know this is happening? And when I say the community, I mean the diaspora community. And he wasn't really sure. So I said, okay, well, then we need to let them know. So a lot of what I do is also community building. I've been doing that since 2018 as part of my advocacy work. So I decided, hey, why not get LinkedIn to help me find people like myself, professionals who are also launching businesses, who are also looking at Africa as a potential market or have already been there. There must be more people like me who think like me. And so I did. And luckily, I had formed enough relationships with people within the African tech ecosystem. So they reshared it, which, made it be reshared like up to 35 times. And people came from Sweden. I had people talking to me from Germany, from Norway, and even Finland, somebody was referred from. So people were just tagging different people. And I've had so many different consultations and meetings of people who would like to support this initiative. It culminated to me now having a partnership with the Danish Refugee Council. They have a diaspora program and they would like to support this as well. So we're currently planning to have a Nordic Africa Diaspora Roundtable in November where we can convene some of these diaspora-led ventures in one room to talk about their actual need and how we can support each other in building our businesses and making sure the resources that are available for people in the Nordics also reach us. Because, as I said, a lot of the times when you are quote unquote second class citizens, although something exists, you may not always have access to it. And
Yeah.
that's what I would like to do, is increase accessibility, visibility, and make sure that we support each other in whatever venture we're doing. So
Yeah.
exciting things ahead.
No, that's really great. So let's talk about like access. What do you think when you talk to you know, African diaspora, or let's just call them like Black uh, you know, entrepreneurs in the region? What do you think is missing the most for them? What do they feel they have the least access to?
So based on my research, funding, and we all know that Black people get the least funding. This is globally. Funding, mentorship is also lacking. And I would say connections to the right people.
Yeah. And again, and when I do this comparison, it's just to kind of give context to like some of our diasporans who are living in other parts of the world, to kind of understand, how this experience is similar to their experiences as, Blacks in the diaspora, and how it's different. What do you think is unique though about the struggles that Black entrepreneurs in the Nordics face?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not really sure because I haven't interacted as much with entrepreneurs in the US since I left. But I had a conversation recently where we spoke about why businesses in America thrive so much. And we spoke about like the culture of America selling this American dream and the way people are really good at branding themselves. Whereas in we live in a culture where you're not actually really supposed to puff yourself up. Like you're not actually really supposed to talk too much about yourself. We have something called the gender law across the Nordic countries, where it's basically an unspoken rule that you are not to think of yourself better than anyone else. You are not better than the group. You are not smarter than the group. You don't know more than the group. And I think that can sometimes seep into entrepreneurs in the way that they communicate their business, in the way that they're able to brand themselves. I have a friend who has her own marketing business, and she is a powerhouse. I mean, she's Nigerian and Danish. So mom is Nigerian, dad is white Danish. And her work ethics comes very much from that Nigerian side, right? But when she used to interview for jobs, they would tell her like, we're a bit too scared to hire you because we think if you come in, you're going to take our place quickly. Yeah. So there's also this type of like, I would say intimidation in the
Mm-hmm.
way that people show up, and or just a bit uncomfortability. They're just not used to it. They're not used to you saying, no, actually, I know my stuff. I can do this. I've launched this business. It's gone da da da. It's not usually the way that conversations are had. It's
Yeah,
funny.
yeah, yeah. And so, do you feel, because I think, African culture, well, African is a broad term, but I think certain parts of Africa, there is the sense of like being communal and not thinking yourself, like above the collective. But that also, strangely enough, coexists with also a sense of that confidence. Like you can be
Yes.
confident and still be part of a collective. What I'm hearing you kind of say is that kind of in Nordic culture, um, the collective actually seems to discourage confidence or the sense of I know what I'm doing. Whereas in African culture, I don't feel like that's discouraged. There's a sense of like, yes, the collective, we need to do something that, benefits everybody. But that is paired with confidence.
Yeah.
I think. So I'm hearing that seems like a cultural clash for someone who was born on the African continent, who was born in an African country, and now comes to this place where you kind of have to move. You have to be a bit more subtle, I think, in
Yeah.
expressing your brand or who you are and what you know and what you're good at.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. You have to meet the right people, I would say. So you would have small communities of people who are really ambitious and who also feel limited. I mean, most businesses who grow to unicorn, like Sweden has many unicorn businesses, they end up in the States because
mhm.
you reach a certain roadblock where it's like you can't thrive here. Like that taxes won't let you, but also the society itself is not really able to handle all of what that ambition means. So in America, it's a bit different. You can go to the moon if that's what you want to do. With your ambitions. So it's a bit different, and it's really demands that you find the right people who are on the same wavelength, who can go that extra mile with you. And those communities do exist. It's just about finding them and not locking yourself. I always say this to my friends, like, don't isolate yourself, because many people feel like, oh, it's not happening in Denmark, or nothing's happening, no one's doing anything, there's no organizations, there's nothing. Where I again connect people, because I'm constantly searching, I'm constantly finding these spaces, and so I can now relay that information to people who may not necessarily be the ones searching, and say, hey, no, it actually does exist, and let me now connect you so that you have like-minded people.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. No, and I think that's what's really remarkable about what you're doing is you're getting this people to see that there's opportunity to grow your business and grow the sense of community as Black people in that region, and that you don't necessarily have to go outside of the region to do that, right? You're getting them to kind of see the opportunity there and kind of working together and mobilizing and forming this kind of sense of a business community where they can kind of thrive without feeling like they're going to hit a ceiling
Yeah.
or a wall when it comes to growth at some point because of the nature of, because of the culture of the region. So I
Yeah.
think that's pretty what makes your work so remarkable. So let's talk about like, so yes, you're building like, or you're helping build this kind of community of Black entrepreneurs in the region, right? Of African diaspora-led businesses in the region.
Yes.
What are you doing to ensure that those businesses are not just networking with each other, but are networking or are somehow contributing to the entrepreneurial environment back on the continent of Africa?
Okay, great. So a part of the Nordic Africa Roundtable that I mentioned is that we would like to invite some African officials as well to come to Denmark. So myself and my partner Aisha, who's working on this initiative now, Aisha has contact with the minister of Diaspora Affairs from the Gambia, and I have reached out to the Minister of Information in Sierra Leone. We're making contact with like the African ministries in Denmark, Sweden, Norway. So we're trying to make sure that people also see that the African, like diasporas, understand that their business can go beyond Denmark as well. And by bringing in these high officials, they can now tell them how they would like to work with the diaspora. Because I do believe that a lot of African countries now are realizing that there is an increased interest from the diaspora to contribute back home. They just don't know how, because it's not as organized. And we would like something a bit more organized than our parents previously were doing. So yeah, I'm involving them and making sure I'm connecting to actual people now.
So you mentioned your parents. I want to just go off, topic a little bit, like a little side note. Like, so how's parents, how have they embraced the work that you're doing? How do you think it's different from how they approached community and business building when they migrated to Denmark? Do you see there's a difference there? Is there a nuance there in how they approach a sense of community and empowerment and how you're approaching it?
Definitely. I think they had community because they were immigrants in a foreign country. And it was really just, even when my mom describes coming, she spent a lot of time with like Nigerians, Cameroonians. You were in a foreign country, everybody else is white. So you kind of cling to people who look like you. They had a lot of community in churches, in mosques. And in their way, it was really just supporting each other to integrate, understand the laws, make sure that they speak the language, job opportunities. Hey, I'm a nurse. My job is searching for other nurses. Come work with me. It was their way of really supporting one another. I think the difference for us is that we do speak the language. We are integrated. We've been educated in Denmark or Sweden or Norway. We have worked with Danes in a different capacity, in a more equals, and not like there are things that probably have been said to my mom that probably would not be said to me in the same way because of the way I am. And in the beginning, when I was doing my advocacy work, like demonstrating and speaking out, my mom was a bit worried, especially because she felt like, no, Denmark has really helped us a lot and we should be grateful. And why are you speaking against these people? You don't understand, you don't know, you don't want them to take the passport from you. So I kind of had to explain how the law works as well. It doesn't work like that. And also freedom of speech, and really saying that, like, if you are a citizen of that country, you should be able to want to better that country, right? So the way I am doing now, I do Nordic Africa relations, meaning I am also looking at what is Denmark's strategic goals with Africa so that it aligns with how I believe that Africa should partner with Denmark. So I'm coming in very diplomatically. I'm coming in knowing I am a Dane, knowing I speak the language, knowing I am educated, and on a very equal foot, and less in as a, can you please help me? Because my mom sometimes would be like, oh, it's so good, let them go help Sierra Leone, da 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 da. And I'd be like, no, Sierra Leone is building itself, mom. Like, what we need is them to partner to support Sierra Leone so that the Sierra Leonean innovators can do what they're doing, less of aid and more of the trade. And explaining that to her, she is completely mind blown and never expected that, in just one generation, we would be having completely different conversations with the Denmark or Danish officials.
Yeah, and I think that's for most people I've talked to so far. Like, we interviewed Jermaine Craig, who's founder of Quanda, who created this platform. I'm sure you might know Jermaine, right?
I love
Who
Con.
Yes, yes. He created the platform to, have people in diaspora pool funds to support, initiatives back on the continent. And that's kind of the general transition or shift that we see happening, right? Going from this kind of idea of the West relationship to Africa being about aid and now being about a mutually beneficial partnership. And so it's
Yes.
interesting how you're telling the story of your mom still coming from an era where it was about aid, and it's not wrong. It's just different, and that's the era they grew up in. That's why they migrated here, and they will probably always see the dynamics or the relationship between the West and Africa being about aid, because it's hard to unlearn that, unprogram that. And so I think it's interesting, like you said, just within a generation, there's been this shift. And that's really been led by those of us in the diaspora who were born here, who are like, okay, so we have the advantage of being in both worlds. We have the power and the influence in the Western world, and we also have cultural ties to the continent. So we are in the best position to help negotiate these partnerships between the West and Africa and ensure that they're truly mutually beneficial. So I'm glad you shared that story about your mom. I'm sure she if she listens to this, she'd be somewhere laughing for her, you calling her out. But I think it's a really important shift to really talk about. We honor our parents, though. Another thing I have been seeing happening that I don't like very much. Again, another side note is that people talk, let's say first generation or second generationers talking about the immigrant parents as if in a somewhat condescending manner. Like I've seen this trend on social media recently of like, oh, my parents, came here and worked in America, came and worked in Europe and spent all their money building a house back in Sierra Leone they can't live in, or in Nigeria they can't live in, or they, just kind of
Yeah.
talking down. And the reason I'm bringing that up is that we can acknowledge that there's been a shift in mentality between us and our parents without downing our parents. Our parents did, I think, what they knew how to do, and they did the best they knew how to do at that time. But I don't think we need to discredit their accomplishments or make it seem like it's less than because there's been this shift that's happening, or that we now have the privilege of thinking differently. So we think that that makes us somehow more evolved than they,
Yeah.
in some way.
And also, I think the conversation about remittance as well is along that line. Like, oh, they were just sending money back and nothing was happening. But that's not actually true. A lot was actually happening. They did sponsor people's education, and they did actually help people come abroad as well, which is something, I mean, I don't know about you, but I haven't helped anybody come abroad, So, and that's a hard work. My mom had sponsored at least 6 people to come abroad, who are now thriving and can now contribute back home as well. And she built a house. She did. And yes, I speak into the building of house a little bit because we forget that wealth is what we pass down, right? So by them building that house is them passing down something to you, because land is going very quickly on the continent. The Chinese are coming in. Lebanese have been there for centuries. Now East and West are looking towards Africa, and they're buying land. So for your parents to have secured that land and can pass it down for you, that is wealth. The same way a white Danish person buys an apartment for their young teenager that they can pass down in Denmark, is the same way that they were thinking. Or at least my mom always says, at least you guys have a house in Sierra Leone, right? And I've been there, I've seen it. It's nice, it's big, costs a lot of money. It took many, many years to build, but it is ours.
Yeah, and that's exactly my point. So is that don't discredit the house that your parents built. So public service announcements, everyone out there, all us first generation or second generation, do not discredit the house that your parents built in the village, as you call it, because that village house is going to be worth something down the road. And yes, wealth is what is passed down. So let's not discredit it because it's not yielding any benefits for us now. Let's not be so short-sighted. So
Yeah.
I'm glad we talked about that. This is a really important. I think this is a whole episode on its own. I am actually planning on having an episode because I'm really really disturbed by kind of the rhetoric and what I'm seeing happening online by younger people about their parents. So good that we touched on that. So what do you think for you? What does success look like? Let's say 5 years from now for this Black diaspora business community that you are helping empower and kind of give a voice to in the region?
Oh, great. It looks like businesses that are growing, thriving. It looks like potentially a dedicated fund that can go to diaspora-led innovations. It looks like mentorship for younger people that are currently in high school who had never seen someone who looks like us have a thriving business. Looks like them looking up to someone and us, having more and more people doing business between the Nordics and Africa. And that's what I'm actually working on. So all the relationships I'm building now, connecting with people, for example, like barbecue, it is for this reason, so that I can forge a new path. By having these relationships, I can now highlight a whole group of people who have existed way before me, and create those bridges so they too can have opportunities.
So this has been really great. And I'm glad that we not only got to talk about the work that you're doing, but just kind of talk about the lived experiences and your lived experience growing up in this region. I think that it was a really important conversation to have, because most of the time when we talk about diasporans, we mainly focus on the Americas, the States, Canada, and even like, let's say, far Western Europe, right? Very, very few times have I heard a conversation specifically about diasporans who live, in the Scandinavian countries. So you've really done a great job of shedding light on what that experience is like and what you're doing to making sure that those in that region who are innovators and entrepreneurs are really empowered. So thank you. This has been great.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been such a lovely conversation.
So if you don't mind, where can we reach you? Oh, we didn't even talk about your podcast.
Yeah.
You're doing so much that we can't even cover it all in one episode.
Yeah.
So tell us about your podcast, what it's about really quick, and how people can tune in.
So in my own words, is a podcast, two Nordic African diasporas, me from Sierra Leone, my co-host from the Gambia, just speaking about what it's like living in different countries and navigating the spaces of Denmark, and then having moved back home, which both of us did. And so we talk a bit about the perspectives and the culture shocks and the relations of being a African woman in both spaces. So yeah.
No, that's great. And I've tuned in, for the record. I'm going to endorse it because I've tuned in into one or two episodes, and it's absolutely amazing. Totally recommend it. And again, as a Black diasporan living in the States, it gave me kind of a new insight and new perspective into, what, kind of the lived experiences of people in that region who are also the same color as me, are kind of going through and living. So highly, highly recommend. Okay, Golda, so before you go, we'd like to do this little trivia thing at the end. We haven't really quite decided what to name it, but this segment, but we're still working on the name. We've had Borderless banter and some other names, whatever. So we're open to suggestions, but just want to, who's on your playlist right now that's just rotating on your playlist? Who's your top artist right now? Black artist, because of the theme of the show.
Yeah. So the thing with me and music is that I listen to songs on repeat, but I'm really bad at artists. It takes me a very long time, but I really like that song, Shake It to the Max. Dun, 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 shake it to the max.
What's that? I think I'm gonna go.
Yeah, shake it to the max.
Okay. Oh, okay. Nicole, our Gen Z resident and producer, said it's Molly. Is that how you say it?
Yes, Molly. Yes, her. She's so good.
See? That's what I here. Our producer told her, she's our resident Gen Z consultant. I don't know what that is. But
I
know
love that song so much. She's done a remix with Shensia, and she did a remix in Jamaica, and she's Ghanaian. I think she's Ghanaian, raised in the States. I'm not sure, but yeah, I love that song. It's on repeat, and I'm constantly dun 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 dun, shake it to the max.
Okay, yes. Our Gen Z consultant, Nicole, said yes, she's Ghanaian.
Yay! At least I got that right. I'm so
awesome. Well, thank you for playing. You win no prizes, but thank you for playing anyway. Thank you so much, Golda. This has been awesome.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Awesome.